Friends, what's left to be said at this great conference? It seems all the good words have been used up already. As I've sat in the sessions and thought about what was being said, the question that formed in my mind was, what have we been doing here? Yes, we've been enjoying each other's company, the coffee breaks, the learning and the like, but really, what is it that we've been engaged in this last 2 days? It seems to me that in our sessions, in our discussions, we've been making constructive plans. We've been making plans at a local level. We've been doing it consciously. And we've been doing it for the purpose of increasing our capacity for service in building a world civilization. This, I think, is the activity in which we've been engaged. So in this brief session this afternoon, I want to step back a little from the detail of the kinds of activities that we spend our time in, and that we must, because it's the priority for the plan, but to reflect on some of the themes, some of the concepts that underlie the kinds of activities that we're engaged in. Many of the discussions have taken place against a backdrop of a world, I think, so aptly described by Counsellor Sabari as a world sleepwalking towards catastrophe, a world where prejudice, hatred, and exclusion can divide communities and feed violence and war. We've seen how abuse of institutional power undermines confidence, drives oppression and human suffering, and fosters political conflict. We see how individuals, without a sufficient consciousness of the common good and well-being of others, can become a source of great harm to their fellow humans. The problems of the world are so deep and so many that many people feel little hope about the future. And many are raising the question about how to bring about change, how to bring about the kind of change that allows us to respect each other and to feel confident that the world will continue. And if you think about it, the questions that are really being raised are about how a mature society should work, how the chief elements in any society, the individual, the community itself, and social institutions, what should be their relationship? How should they interact? How should they work to create cohesion of a society? These are very fundamental questions. They raise philosophic questions. They raise questions that will ultimately, to which science, sociology, psychology, philosophy, system sciences, all of these ways of thinking will need to be brought to bear, along with the teachings of Baha'u'llah, to forge understandings of these deep questions that the current state of the world is raising. For Baha'is, working toward a new set of relationships between the three protagonists, as we call them, and the House of Justice describes them as protagonists of civilization building. So we're not just actors, not just people taking a prominent role or institutions taking a prominent role, but our task, the task of the protagonists, is civilization building. So as we work towards a new set of relationships between these three protagonists, this work is connected with a number of factors. I think it's connected with Baha'u'llah's vision about the state of the world and his vision of a new world order. It connects very specifically with the principle of the oneness of humankind, which has been described by the House of Justice as the hallmark of the age of maturity. And it connects with the work, the ongoing work of our community. The Baha'is around the world and their friends are striving to serve the divine plan by translating Baha'u'llah's teachings into reality and action. We're learning to generate a mature relationship between these three actors, the individual, the community, and social institutions. And this is one of the main areas of learning that underpin all of our everyday activities within the community. The divine plan, which is alluded to in the title of the top of my talk, is tied to the implementation of the mission of Baha'u'llah's revelation. A mission that's so profound that it calls for changes not only at the level of the individual, but in the very structures of society. This mission is to bring into being a new creation. What we're doing is different. The kind of solutions to the world's problems that we're seeking are different. They're not the same as the many of the solutions that are being tried in the world around us. Because even though the efforts of people of goodwill are important and contribute to human well-being, it's going to take the revelation, it's going to take the spiritual teachings of Baha'u'llah to really bring about a change that is fundamental, to bring about the organic change in the nature of society and its institutions. So our task, the task assigned to the members of the Baha'i community, and our part in this historic mission is to create a pattern for future society, not just for today, but to lay the foundations in such a way that they'll be sustainable and flexible and creative to allow the world to move forward toward the world order of Baha'u'llah. We're engaged, as all of the speakers have said, in a process of learning, a long-term process of learning. And our marching orders come from the global plans, the series of global plans that have been given to us over time by the Universal House of Justice. there's so much that could be said about each one of these points, but I want to keep this moving. As we're engaged in laying the foundation and building a future society, one that will be appropriate to the collective maturity of humankind, it raises questions about how a mature society should act. How should it be different from what's being tried currently? What about the three protagonists? Now, we know that the purpose of the faith is to present Baha'u'llah's message of hope, of love, and practical reconstruction. We're engaged in using our understanding of the revelation to begin to reconstruct, plan systematically to reconstruct foundational elements of society. This is really revolutionary. If you think about it, it is really a phenomenal task, an exciting task to which we're called. Now, the writings of the faith, and most recently the current letters of the Universal House of Justice, have been very clear in indicating the extent of the change that's required. Let me just take one statement from one of their messages. The House wrote, "The light of the revelation is destined to illumine every sphere of endeavour, everything that we might engage in." And then the House tells us that in each of these separate spheres, in each, the relationships that sustain society are to be recast. So everything is up in the air and needs to be changed. Everything needs to be recast in light of our unfolding understanding of the teachings of the faith and the experience of our ongoing activities. Okay, the House not only tells us how much needs changing, but they suggest some critical areas that need to be considered. And you're familiar, I know, with the statement in the letter where the House refers specifically to the three protagonists, the individual, the institutions, and the community. And the House tells us that they're being shaped under the direct influence of Baha'u'llah's revelation. It seems to me that as we become more informed about the faith, as we try to put the teachings into practice, as we do the practice components of the core activities, that our behaviour is being modified, gradually modified through our learning, our reflection, and our experience. The relationships between the three protagonists are also undergoing profound transformation. And the House tells us that these relationships are characterised by cooperation and receptivity and reciprocity. They further tell us that our vision for making plans about a future society, an inspiration for this is the analogy, the idea, which compares the world to a human body. and the importance of cooperation in the operation of that system. Much emphasis is given to the principle of the oneness of humankind, a principle which the House tells us is to infuse all facets of organised life on the planet. In another place, in their peace message, the House of Justice tells us that the oneness of mankind is the first fundamental prerequisite for the reorganisation and administration of the world as one country. And then connecting, bringing us right back to our activities, in another recent letter, the House reminds us how Baha'is across the globe are striving to establish a pattern of activity and corresponding administrative structures that embody the principle of the oneness of humankind. Now, it's important not to feel too comfortable about the concept of the oneness of humankind, because sometimes familiar concepts we begin to take for granted. And again, the House reminds us that the principle of the oneness of humankind, as proclaimed by Baha'u'llah, doesn't only ask for cooperation among peoples and nations, but it calls for a complete reconceptualization of the relationships that sustain society. And we could spend a week just reflecting on the significance of that statement. How do we go about reconceptualizing, rethinking? Is it an event? Do we do it once and then move on? Gosh, we've got that. No, it seems to me that it's a lifelong activity. It must become a lifelong habit. And it seems, as I think about it, to involve a number of factors. I think one has to be really aware about the current state of society. We have to be aware of our social reality, how the habits of thought that sustain current views that we find in the world, how they may have been had survival value at a particular time in the social evolution of humankind, but the world is in a different place. And many of these assumptions need to be challenged and rethought. I think in addition to that, we have to be committed to really deepening our understanding of concepts and teachings that have become familiar, like the oneness of mankind. Because unless we do, our approach will be too simplistic. And we need to think in a more sophisticated way. And this too is part of a learning process. But it's not all in the head. Reconceptualization involves more than just rethinking and studying. It's critical to reconceptualization is service, acts of service, being engaged in community building, being engaged in social action, learning from people in the wider community with whom we collaborate. Learning from experience. In one of the letters that I've read, I can't remember which one, there's a reassurance that as we make an effort, a consistent effort to foster relationships that embody the principle of the oneness of mankind, then the desired relationships will progressively emerge. And that these new relationships will be characterised by, among other things, a revised conception of power, freed from the notion of dominance, with the accompanying ideas of contest, contention, division, and superiority. And the new relationships will embody a vision of the world befitting for humanity's rich cultural diversity. And it will accept no lines of separation. We no longer be able to divide the world into us and them. Okay. We're engaged in this learning process. We're doing it with humility. We're striving. We're making progress. In fact, the video, the example of the Dargah community, I think provides a glimpse of how some of the features of a mature society might develop. I want to just close this by reading a statement from another letter of the House of Justice. This is the Rizwan 2012 message, which describes the impact of the implementation of some of these values, like the oneness of mankind, within a Baha'i community. And it gives us some clues about how the behaviour of the individual, the institutions, and the community will evolve. Okay. So what the Baha'i teachings do, and the example of the faith's global community, is to offer a visible alternative, a vision of a different kind of society. A society where everyday interactions are shaped by consciousness of the oneness of humankind. Relationships imbued with this consciousness are being cultivated by Baha'is and their friends in villages and neighbourhoods across the world. From them can be detected the pure fragrances of reciprocity and cooperation, of concord and love. Within such unassuming settings, even my sector in Brisbane, within such unassuming settings, a visible alternative to society's familiar strife is emerging. So it becomes apparent that the individual who wishes to exercise self-expression responsibly participates thoughtfully in consultation, devoted to the common good, and spurs temptation to insist on personal opinion. A Baha'i institution approaching the need for coordinated action channeled toward fruitful ends aims not to control, but to nurture and encourage. The community that is to take charge of its own development recognises an invaluable asset in the unity afforded through wholehearted engagement in the plans devised by the institutions. Under the influence of Baha'u'llah's revelation, the relationships among these three are being endowed with new warmth, new life. In aggregate, they constitute a matrix within which a world spiritual civilization, bearing the imprint of divine inspiration, gradually matures.